We are now into the second week of war in Europe. Actually, we're in the second week of watching war in Europe from afar, like a person safely looking down from a high-rise apartment onto a city street far below. You can see the victim being attacked. You offer to call the police. You offer a word of encouragement for safety. You may even alert others to the injustice you are observing. You will do almost anything except what the victim actually needs you to do, which is help. Ukraine has asked for help. Ukraine begged our senators over the weekend for help, for a no-fly zone, for weapons, for more sanctions, anything to stop the massacre. Americans have been inspired by the courage of the Ukrainian people, by their resolve, their ingenuity, their willingness to fight in the face of overwhelming odds. And Americans have been outraged at the killing of women and children, the images of families separated from family, perhaps forever, in an effort to simply survive. We are outraged at the multiple attempts to assassinate President Zelensky, the recklessness of Russia, and a near brush with nuclear disaster. Yes, America is inspired and outraged, just not enough to climb down from the window and actually join the fight. We are told there's a contractual obligation to defend NATO countries like Poland and Estonia and Lithuania. There's a treaty, a legal obligation, a contract, if you will, to defend. Contracts are what we sign to repay bank loans and get cell phone service. Morality does not, should not require a contract. Most of our obligations in life are not contractual. They're deeper than that. We don't need a contract to defend a victim from a bully. There's no contract in place when we see a child being attacked or an elderly person being assaulted or a single person ambushed by a larger gang. We don't need a contract to defend a neighbor. We just need to figure out who our neighbors really are. We're told Poland is worth defending. So too with Romania and Hungary and Slovakia. Those are neighbors, we're told, because we signed a contract. All that separates those we will defend from those we will not defend is a single step on a map. Each of those countries has a border with Ukraine. So our moral outrage, our duty to defend, is apparently dependent upon a single step and a faint boundary line. There's a book on my bedside table that's been there for many years, The Gates of Fire. It's a 2,000-year-old story about a small group of Greek soldiers who went to fight a battle they could not win against an enemy they could not defeat. They left home to lose a battle in hopes that in the process they could inspire others to take up arms and win the war. Sparta lost the battle at Thermopylae, but their heroism inspired others to go win the war, a war we benefit from 2,500 years later. Doing the right thing does not require a treaty. Doing the right thing does not depend upon a contract. It depends upon the will of the people. The president is the commander-in-chief, but Congress decides when to wage war. And perhaps it's time to debate what obligation we owe ourselves and others. Do we owe the Ukrainian people something more than what we provided? Do we owe ourselves something more than merely offering good wishes and hopes for safe passage so innocents can escape their homeland? Is that the best the world's greatest country can offer? Good thoughts and a safe escape route. Is it time for the people's house to actually debate what is on the people's minds, which is whether more can and should be done for a country being invaded, raped, and killed by a bully? There's a marker at the site of the battle between the Spartans and the Persians. That marker says, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." That single sentence served to remind the world they cared enough to actually sacrifice. They did not calculate the odds of winning the battle. They calculated the cost of losing the larger war. So what will be written about us during the time a bully ravished a neighboring country? That we relied upon a contract, that we sent good wishes and bought less Russian oil and gas, that we seized the yachts of those who could afford to buy more yachts, that Ukraine was not our neighbor, but merely our neighbor's neighbor. What will be written about this time? And are we okay with that echoing through the halls of history? Joining us now is the former Secretary of DHS and the former top lawyer for the Department of Defense, Mr. Jay Johnson. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. What is your take on where we currently are in this war and Putin's real motives here?
Well, first, Trey, thanks for having me. Trey, you can appreciate what I'm about to say because you were a member of Congress and you were a member of the House Intelligence Committee. I no longer have access to intelligence reports. I'm no longer a member of the National Security Council sitting in the Situation Room wrestling with the choices and the stakes. So what I say has to be accepted with that limitation. Trey, 8 days ago, I said publicly that this thing was going to get a lot worse, that it was going to, before it got better. As Americans saw the images of carnage in the streets in Ukraine, innocent men, women, and children dying as a result of Putin's war crimes, the Biden administration was going to face domestic and international pressure to do more than we are doing right now. We're rapidly reaching the moment of truth when we must decide, as the leader of the free world, whether we have an obligation to become more directly involved in what is happening in Ukraine. And before we take that step, and that would be a huge step, one we have not seen in generations, we have to remember a couple of things. One, it is much easier to become involved in an armed conflict than it is to extricate oneself from one. If we put boots on the ground, if we put Americans in harm's way, for example, in the air and on the ground, we must have a clear military objective, a clear exit plan to do so. And if we find ourselves in a conflict in Ukraine, we will find ourselves in direct conflict with Russia. We managed to avoid conflict with Russia all through the Cold War, during the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago in 1962. And so this is a moment when we need to think very carefully about next steps. I think that it will be inevitable that we will have to do more. I believe that Putin is detached from reality. I believe he's isolated. I believe he's been president of Russia far too long. I believe he's not listening to his cabinet anymore, and he has a detached sense of reality. He probably believed that he would be greeted as a liberator on the streets of Ukraine if we went in, which is wrong. And so we need to think carefully about next steps. I think more direct involvement of some kind will be inevitable, more arms, more sanctions, but let's be cautious at this moment. This is a perilous moment, Trey.
Mr. Secretary, conflict manifests itself in different ways, including cyber attacks. Is our country prepared for a cyber attack? And by prepared, I mean not just governmental entities, but also the private entities that we rely upon.
Trey, as you know, most of critical infrastructure in this country is in private hands. I believe we need to be on high alert right now. The Department of Homeland Security, through the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, has put out some very useful guidance on what those in critical infrastructure, the Financial Services Agency, the Defense Industrial Base need to do to protect themselves against cyber attacks from Russia. We've seen cyber attacks from Russia, from a Russian platform, the SolarWinds attack, for example. And so we have a huge capability, and that capability right now, in my judgment, needs to be on high alert. The more we become involved in this, I think the more it will become inevitable that the Russian government, from a Russian platform, will direct some form of cyber attack against the United States.
Jay Johnson, former Secretary of DHS, former top lawyer for our military. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday night and loaning us your expertise.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.